There is a brown bottle sitting in almost every bathroom cabinet in this country that is chemically capable of replacing at least a half dozen different products most people still buy separately. And almost nobody has ever been told why it works on all of them at once. It isn't 20 separate coincidences. It's one single chemical reaction, doing the same basic thing to 20 different problems. And once you understand that one reaction, you'll never look at that bottle as just a first aid item again. I'm going to walk you through 20 real uses for ordinary hydrogen peroxide today, organized into 4 groups, so this doesn't turn into a list you forget by item 7. Pests, stains and laundry, home surfaces, and garden and plant care. Hydrogen peroxide is water with one extra oxygen atom attached, chemically H2O2 instead of H2O, and that single extra atom is the entire reason this compound does anything at all. That structure is inherently unstable, and hydrogen peroxide is constantly, if slowly, breaking back down into ordinary water and oxygen gas, which is exactly what you're watching when you see it fizz and bubble on contact with a cut or a stain. That fizzing isn't the product working in some vague sense. It's the literal decomposition reaction happening in front of you, releasing oxygen as it goes. That released oxygen is a genuinely reactive, aggressive molecule, chemically eager to bond with and break apart other compounds it comes into contact with, a process chemists call oxidation. This single property, being a strong, reliable oxidizer, is the entire system behind every one of the 20 uses I'm about to cover. Oxidation breaks down the pigment molecules responsible for a stain's color, which is why it bleaches. Oxidation damages the cell walls and internal structures of bacteria, fungal spores, and other microorganisms, which is why it disinfects. Oxidation disrupts the outer tissue of certain pests and pathogens, which is why it works against some garden and pest problems. One practical note before we get into the list. Ordinary household hydrogen peroxide, the brown bottle sold at essentially every grocery and drugstore, is a 3% solution. 3% hydrogen peroxide, 97% water. Much higher concentrations exist for industrial and specialized purposes, sometimes called food-grade peroxide, at concentrations like 35%. And those are genuinely hazardous, capable of causing real chemical burns, and require careful dilution and handling that's a completely different conversation from the ordinary 3% bottle sitting in most kitchens. Something to keep in mind. Everything today is built around that standard, safe 3% household concentration. Let's start with the category most people have never connected to that brown bottle at all. Number 1. An ant mound drench. Poured directly into the entrance of an outdoor ant mound, hydrogen peroxide's oxidizing action causes real physical disruption within the tunnel structure, and the mechanical force of the fizzing reaction itself helps dislodge and damage the colony's internal architecture. This works best as mechanical disruption and a supplementary tool alongside the bait and exclusion methods I've covered in an earlier video on this channel, reaching well beyond what a single application can physically reach. Number 2. A fungal spray for garden plants. Diluted further, roughly 1 part hydrogen peroxide to 2 or 3 parts water, and applied as a foliar spray, this has real documented use against powdery mildew and certain other fungal issues affecting garden plants, since the oxidizing action damages fungal spores and the hyphae, the thread-like structures fungi use to spread across a leaf surface. This is genuine, agriculturally recognized use, though, like most organic treatments, It works better as consistent early intervention than as a rescue treatment for an infection that's already deeply established. Number 3. Mold prevention in stored feed and grain. A light misting of diluted hydrogen peroxide across the surface of stored grain or feed, particularly in a barn or storage area prone to the kind of humidity that encourages mold growth, uses that same oxidizing action against mold spores before they have the chance to establish, which matters directly for anyone storing feed through a humid season the way I do on this farm. Number 4. Disinfecting animal housing. Diluted and used to wipe down or spray a chicken coop, a rabbit hutch, or similar animal housing between cleanings, hydrogen peroxide's antimicrobial oxidizing action helps knock down the bacterial load that builds up in an enclosed animal space, without leaving behind the kind of lingering chemical residue you'd want to avoid in a space where animals are eating and resting directly. Number 5. A slug and snail deterrent. A diluted spray applied directly to slugs and snails, or to the specific plants and areas they've been targeting, has some real supporting evidence as a contact deterrent, working through the same tissue-disrupting oxidation, though the evidence here is honestly more modest than the fungal spray use, and I'd treat this as one tool among several rather than your primary defense against a serious slug problem. This next cluster is probably the most well-known use for hydrogen peroxide, and there's good reason it's stuck around this long. Number 6. Bloodstain. This is likely the most famous use of hydrogen peroxide there is, and I covered cold water as the correct approach to protein-based stains like blood in an earlier video on this channel, working by avoiding the heat that permanently sets the protein into fabric. Hydrogen peroxide works through a genuinely different mechanism, oxidizing and breaking down the pigment in the blood itself rather than relying on temperature to keep the protein loosely bound to the fiber, which is exactly why the two techniques can be used together rather than as competing approaches. Cold water first to lift what will lift through gentle soaking, followed by hydrogen peroxide applied directly to whatever staining remains, to oxidize away the color that's left. Number 7. Underarm and sweat stains. Applied directly to the yellowed fabric under the arms of a white garment, left to sit for a period before washing. The same oxidizing action that lifts blood pigment breaks down the discoloration caused by a combination of sweat and the aluminum compounds common in many antiperspirants, a stain that plain detergent alone often struggles to fully address. Number 8. Yellowed white fabric. Whites that have dulled or yellowed over time, whether from age, storage, or repeated washing, can often be meaningfully brightened by a soak in diluted hydrogen peroxide before a normal wash cycle, the oxidation breaking down the compounds responsible for that dulled, yellowed appearance in a way that's considerably gentler on fabric fibers than chlorine bleach. Number 9. Grass stains. Grass stains are, chemically, largely a chlorophyll pigment stain, and that pigment is exactly the kind of organic colorant hydrogen peroxide's oxidizing action is built to break down. Applied directly to a fresh grass stain and allowed to sit briefly before normal washing. Number 10. Mildew stains on fabric. Fabric that's developed the dark spotting characteristic of mildew exposure, whether from being stored damp or simply sitting in a humid environment too long, responds to hydrogen peroxide's dual action here. The antimicrobial effect addresses the mildew organism itself, while the oxidizing bleaching action lightens the visible staining it left behind. This next cluster covers the everyday surfaces around a house where hydrogen peroxide quietly outperforms a lot of what people reach for instead. Number 11. Grout and tile. Applied directly to grout lines and left to sit before scrubbing, hydrogen peroxide's combined antimicrobial and bleaching action addresses both the mold and mildew organisms commonly responsible for grout discoloration and the visible staining those organisms leave behind, restoring grout closer to its original color rather than just masking the discoloration. Number 12. Cutting boards. Wiped or sprayed onto a cutting board and left to sit briefly before rinsing, hydrogen peroxide's antimicrobial oxidizing action addresses bacteria that can work into the small grooves and scratches a well-used cutting board inevitably develop. Particularly useful after cutting raw meat or poultry as a step beyond simple soap and water. Number 13. Sponges and dishcloths. A kitchen sponge is genuinely one of the most bacteria-dense items in most homes, given how consistently damp it stays and how much organic material it comes into contact with. And a periodic soak in hydrogen peroxide meaningfully knocks down that bacterial load in a way plain water rinsing simply doesn't accomplish. Number 14. Refrigerator interiors. Wiped across refrigerator shelving and interior surfaces, hydrogen peroxide's antimicrobial action addresses the bacterial buildup that accumulates in a space that's cool, frequently opened, and in regular contact with food without leaving behind the lingering chemical scent some commercial cleaners do in an enclosed space where food is stored. Number 15. Garbage disposal odor and buildup. Poured directly down a garbage disposal and allowed to sit briefly before running, hydrogen peroxide addresses both the bacterial buildup responsible for persistent disposal odor and provides a mild oxidizing action against the organic residue that accumulates in a space that's difficult to physically scrub. The last cluster brings us back outside, to a handful of uses most gardeners have never heard explained. Number 16. A seed germination soak. Seeds soaked briefly in a diluted hydrogen peroxide solution before planting have shown, in some horticultural use, improved germination rates, likely related to the additional oxygen made available to the seed during the critical early hours of water uptake, alongside a mild antimicrobial effect against surface pathogens that can interfere with successful germination. Number 17. Root rot treatment. A plant suffering from root rot, typically caused by overwatering and the anaerobic low oxygen conditions that develop in consistently waterlogged soil, can genuinely benefit from a diluted hydrogen peroxide drench applied to the soil, since the oxygen released as it decomposes helps counteract exactly the low oxygen environment that root rot organisms thrive in, alongside direct antimicrobial action against the rot-causing organisms themselves. Number 18. Cut flower vase water. A small amount of hydrogen peroxide added to a vase of cut flowers slows the bacterial buildup in the water that normally shortens a cut flower's usable life, since that bacterial growth is a significant factor in how quickly cut stems become blocked and unable to draw water effectively, extending how long the arrangement stays fresh. Number 19. Disinfecting pruning tools between cuts. I mentioned tool cleanliness in an earlier video on this channel about tomato pruning, specifically wiping a blade down between plants when disease is a concern, and hydrogen peroxide works well for exactly that purpose. The antimicrobial action helping prevent a blade from carrying a pathogen from one plant directly to the next. Number 20. Compost pile management. A light application across a compost pile that's developed an unpleasant odor or shows signs of harmful pathogen buildup rather than healthy decomposition can help rebalance the pile, The oxidizing action addressing problem organisms, while the additional oxygen released supports the beneficial aerobic decomposition process. One practical detail worth knowing, regardless of which of these 20 uses you actually end up using. Hydrogen peroxide genuinely degrades over time, breaking down into plain water even sitting unused on a shelf. And that breakdown accelerates significantly with light exposure, which is exactly why it's sold in an opaque brown bottle in the first place, rather than clear plastic. Once opened, a bottle that sat around for many months, particularly if it hasn't been kept in that original dark bottle or somewhere shielded from light, may have lost enough of its original concentration to underperform at any of the uses covered today. So if a bottle you've had sitting around for a long while doesn't produce the visible fizzing reaction you'd expect on contact with a stain or a cut, that's a pretty clear sign it's lost most of its potency, and replacing it rather than continuing to rely on it is worth the very small cost involved. Hydrogen peroxide is inexpensive, produced by many different manufacturers, and sold in a completely generic, unbranded form at nearly every store in the country. Think about it. A generic bottle of hydrogen peroxide has no single company positioned to profit from teaching you it can do the job of 6 of those products combined. From this video, pick the 2 or 3 uses most relevant to whatever you're actually dealing with right now, rather than trying to overhaul how you clean and garden all at once. And keep hydrogen peroxide in its original dark bottle, checked periodically for that fizzing reaction that tells you it's still at full strength. I hope you found this video useful. Remember, keep your roof honest, and your house will keep you.